So what I'm going to do is I finished the base last time, as hopefully is visible, but I didn't paint the skull under his foot. Now I'm going to do that now. I doubt I'll mess this up much when I paint the layers above, because they're pretty neat and pretty distinct on the shoe. So I should just be able to get the skull done and that'd be it. So as you can see, I've worn a bit of paint off here after rebase coat this. What I'll do is I'll probably put a little bit of extra paint on the areas I've worn off, and then a kind of thin layer over the whole lot. Only slightly thin down this. Trying to just go for a smooth application. Okay, don't want too much on there because I don't want it to pool. Bits underneath may not get perfect coverage, but that's okay, they'll be in the shadow and this will be partly covered by a wash anyway. Okay, time for a wash. This is the old Devlan mud because I don't have enough Agrax Earth today. On the subject of paints, to show you what paints I've got brown, pale brown, slightly paler brown, white, dull brown. There you go. If you're wanting specific colour mixes, specific colour names, you're watching the wrong video. Just choose a kind of natural selection of browns that can hopefully follow on from each other. So wash, this is quite a pale colour, it's quite a dark wash. I'm going to thin down the wash a bit, just going to do it with water this time. So that's a certain amount of wash and a certain amount of water again, it doesn't really matter. Although later to see it's about half this time. Okay, now we're going to apply the wash over the whole area. Watch it sink into the recesses as if by magic. As well as providing good shading in itself, this provides a nice guideline for any future shading. What the hell is that? Some bloody hair on the model. Future shading we're actually going to paint on. Go underneath there. You can actually see when I'm doing this bit that the coverage of the paint, the base coat underneath is not perfect. I say that's okay. This bit's quite in the shade anyway, and we will be painting over this in sort of various techniques that will remedy that. Okay. Doesn't matter that this has gone onto the pre-painted rock a bit because it's only gone on in the recesses. The rock's quite dark anyway, so it'll just accentuate the shading, nothing else. Some other areas you've got to be a bit more careful of. Now the wash has dried, and as usual for these the magic washes, it's already done quite a nice job of putting some preliminary shading on there. It's also darkened down the colour slightly, but I'll do what I generally tend to do with these is I'll reapply the base colour effectively as a sort of first highlight on there. So I'll do, depending on the area, I'll do maybe just a simple layering, maybe a little bit of blending on the kind of larger areas at the back. Then when that's on, I'll probably do a little bit of shading and then start building up the highlights proper. So let's go. So what I will do first is I'll use the pure paint. I might swap to Pro Art Brush. I'll use the unthin paint to do sort of areas that I can do by simple layering. So just put it up here, like so. Layer on there, put it at the front. A bit around there for now. Keep cleaning the brush and sucking it or bringing it to a point again. See some of these details on here, it's pretty easy just to put a little bit of a layer on without having to do anything too fancy. And there'll be some bits at the back here. Obviously this is a large area, so I'll probably put some little layer on first to build up the colour, and then just feather the edge of that. So now I'll probably do this a couple of times to get a really good coat colour on there. Bring that right the way up to the edge of the boot there, because the way the light goes down there'd only be a very fine line of darkness distinguishing those two areas. Underneath, just do a little bit, doesn't have to be just kind of blend those. Doesn't have to be too much down there because there wouldn't be much light hitting those areas. But these areas under here you probably only need this and maybe another little highlight. You don't have to go too far on these. Again, although this light is showing them up quite clearly, they are mostly in shadow when the model is held kind of normally. So at the front will be quite bright, so you want to make sure there's plenty of paint on this. And again, this area on the top of the front here, again that would catch quite a bit of light, so get a good coat on that. Okay, a little bit on the whatever aspect of the skull. It all looks a bit alien. It almost looks like a gene stealer skull or something, so I don't dread to think what sort of monster it actually is. So build those up a little bit in there, a bit more on there. This is a good example here, like this area here, you'd think maybe I'll highlight this a bit, but it is, would be mostly in shadow. So I'll just put a little bit more on there, but don't go too far underneath. Okay, now I'm going to get a finer brush and I'm just going to accentuate the shadows a little bit more. I'm using a very muted, desaturated grey for this. Well, it's not sort of desaturated, it's very, I guess, desaturated brown or something. Actually going to switch to the Winsor & Newton, because this Pro Art is one of my old Pro Arts and a great tip on it. So this, I'm going to check this paint, it's fairly translucent, so again I'm just going to use it out of the pot. I'm just going to do a little line under there. Just make sure I'm not getting too much of a bright line, tiny little bit of blending, sometimes that's all you need. Again under here. Around the back. Okay, and I'm back. Pro tip for aspiring YouTube painting video makers is when you charge your camera batteries, make sure you turn the plug on at the wall. Right, in the meantime I have decided I'm going to go for a slightly darker grey tone to do the shading here, just because I felt the other one wasn't very effective. So this is a dull grey. Get the brush. Again, this is another fairly translucent paint, so I can apply it on without too much thinning. So I'm just going to go around a few areas, make sure I've got some of this will just be kind of lining underneath. Some of it may do just a little feathering out. Just bringing a little bit of definition to those areas. Going to go around the teeth as well. It doesn't matter if I get it on the teeth a bit, because these will be lightened up a bit later on. Just a little bit around there. Sort of just doing a little bit of lining, I guess. Maybe a little bit of shading under there as well. A little bit in there. Make sure we do some at the back here. Again, this underside can be done in a bit more of a simple, crude way. shading under here. You can see when I apply this, it's pretty translucent. I'm going to start highlighting it, just to get a nice smooth effect. I'm going to do a mixture of the base tone and a lighter kind of beigey bone colour. Do a sort of half-half mixture of that first, thin down. Start applying this with a little bit more care, going further up to the raised edges here. So these little balls on here, little dab on top, clean the brush, a little bit of feathering down. Again, it's got a ridge on here, a line on the top. Feather it down, feather it a bit on both sides because there wouldn't be an abrupt line. You see, when you're blending on smaller areas like this, you really don't need to do as much blending. This area will require a bit more focus, so I'll go over a couple of coats of this. Really want to feather this edge very well, not worry too much about coverage for now. Bring it right down a bit. Inside here I'm doing the bare minimum, not even really kind of properly blending, just putting a couple of little lines on. So it won't catch much light when the figure's displayed normally, but this just shows there's a little bit of definition in there. It's a matter of working back and forth, trying to get the look fairly harmonious. See, I now notice that this ridge here could do with a bit more highlighting on it, so you can put some more attention into that. I'm going to go and do another coat on here. This is kind of the largest area of the skull, so it's a nice smooth colour on there. Looks good. A little bit of work on these bits here again, just a tiny little dot of paint because they won't be really that visible. Just so because that little bit there that's visible, that little bit may catch the light, so that's about right. Some of these areas I'm almost just doing like really almost just a little bit of lining on, not much blending. Okay, well, a little bit more definition around this hole here. Now this is using the Winsor & Newton Series 7, just size 0. It's got a decent tip on it, so you can go around and do this detail work pretty okay. Again, just a little bit inside, not much. Right. Not entirely happy about that. I'm going to just put a little bit of detail there. Yeah, it just gives it, I say, kind of like it wouldn't get that much light, but you should be able to see something down there. Okay, I'm going to do pure pale bone colour highlight here. What I'll do is now I'm going to start bringing in all the teeth. Just painting them. Normally, steady hand following the lines of the model down. You see how well my fingers are braced here? Because these are so small, you don't need to do much blending or fancy work on them. Again, the ones inside, these will be hard to reach, so I'm going to get very carefully. See, my hand is not perfectly steady, but just by doing a little bit at a time, so to compensate for that. I'll move it back this way, make sure I can get the ones at the front all kind of well covered. And work out what's going on here. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to paint some little edge highlights on this, and then I'm going to see if it needs a bit more attention, a bit more blending or not. Not perfectly neat. I can try and get rid of some of the paint there. You can always just put a little bit of a wash over this area, make sure the recesses are fully darkened, and that'll define the details around the teeth a little bit more. But in the meantime, I'll just keep doing some of the edges here. This aspect is kind of time consuming because you need to be quite steady, quite patient, little bits at a time, but it is the kind of almost like the final section of it. So using just the edge of the brush to go down there. Some of these you will be able to just catch it with the edge. It should be an easier method than painting. Doing little lines along here, sort of edge highlighting without a real edge, but it does bring out the detail. I'm not doing it too strong here. A little bit on there just to show those. Okay, that's turning out okay. And this bit at the back, I'm going to thin down the paint a bit. You wouldn't really get, there's no real edge up here, but I am going to put a bit of paint, again just blend it in. The light would catch the very top bit of the skull. So how's that looking? It's looking alright, but I think it could be a bit paler, a bit more bleached. So I'm just going to use some thin paint. And this is sort of mixing and matching techniques. Thin paint and maybe sort of half thin layering, half blending over the areas that I've already lined, just to lighten them up a bit and get a bit of a smoother edge to it. So here, for example, putting that thin paint over here. Making sure it doesn't pull too much. So what I'll do now is, mostly happy with that. I say this doesn't have to be so prominent because it is just the base. You don't want it to stand out too much. You don't want it to distract from the model. That's why I've gone for like a fairly standard kind of bone sort of dullish brown bone tone, not going wood. I'm going to do a bit of a Devlan mud wash around the teeth, then I'm going to re-highlight that area. So this wash is not thinned down as much, and it's going to be applied with quite a lot of control. Just dotting it around the bottom of the teeth here. Doesn't matter if I go over onto the skull a bit, because I will be redoing those areas. You can see it's redefining the teeth a bit there. Also put a little bit more wash there, a little bit. This is a good thing about washes. If you've gone over an area and you've made sort of very slight errors in painting into crevices, then rather than having to try and either repaint the whole thing or neatly line them, the wash will allow you to just tidy that up more easily. So wait for that to dry and do some final highlighting. So this is where it gets a little bit fiddly, really making sure those teeth are pulled out well. So I'm going to go back to my pale bone tone, carefully redefine those teeth. Don't have the paint very thin for this, because otherwise it could just flow into the gaps. But only a little bit on the brush, and only applying a little bit at a time. Now I'm going to get just simply a brighter and lighter bone colour. Very pale this, but it's a natural transition from the previous colour. So, show it on the teeth first. Paint not all the way to the top of the teeth, but more at the bottom of them, and just bring the brush down. Try and get it going down to the point of the teeth. See, that's getting quite a sharp little point at the bottom there. There we go, sort of standing out okay. I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting with this pale bone colour. Again, just kind of bringing out some of what would be the brightest spots on the model, or on the skull. See areas like this at the front here, definitely catch a fair bit of light. A nice little point there. No, it's too much, so I will just use a bit of blending and also a bit of just taking the colour off with a damp brush. So if you work quickly and damp your brush quickly, you can correct some little mistakes as you go along. What I might do now is, this area under here is a bit plain. I mean, it looks alright. Actually, could do it with just a tiny little bit. I'm going to blend that out, don't want it to be too strong. Can try and paint just a few subtle little cracks on here, to be very faint with this. And then, once you've got the cracks, you just put like a pseudo highlight of where the edge of the crack might be. So this would be underneath here. Pro tips for this, take your time. Try and have a steady hand. Never be afraid to abandon that particular stroke and think, no, not steady enough, I'll have to redo it. There'll be quite a lot of times when I'm painting detail like this and I'll pick up the brush, I'll start to try and apply paint, I won't like it, clean the brush, start again. I'll do that several times until I'm happy with the stroke. This can be, you want it quite subtle on here. You can always add more detail like this, but once you've painted it, it's a bit of an arse to repaint, especially if you have to redo the blending and stuff again. There we go, a little bit of detail on there. What I might do, might need to define the teeth a bit more. So we're going to go over the top a little bit here. Define the setting. Define the setting for the teeth a bit more. So, and then I'm going to get some, in theory I'm going to get some pure white. I think it's dried up. But I don't need a lot of paint for this, so it doesn't really matter if this paint's a bit screwed. Okay, a little bit of pure white here, which normally would be quite harsh on bone like this, but this will just be sort of a little line going down to the very tips of the teeth. Using sort of the tip and the edge of the brush, make sure it captures the point at the end. There you go, just brought them out a little bit more. Okay, so this kind of works okay for me. Could possibly do a little bit more of the crack effect maybe on the front, but I just like to show it on the back because it's a nice easy area to do that, and it demonstrates painting some fine detail. The key to that is just, take your time, go with it, go with the stroke and just kind of gently try and apply it. And if you're thinking I'm just going to be too heavy handed, or the paint's dried out, or you don't like the angle you're at, just stop it, clean the brush, get some more paint, turn it around, think okay, you can do it here, like so. One final thing, final fiend pro tip here, the clean brush. I've painted this area, I'm going to be holding the model by the base a lot. I'm going to rub the paint off this, and having just put that F in, that's really annoying. So what I tend to do at the moment is, the main areas that I could brush against with my hands when I'm holding it, I tend to varnish them with a paint on matte varnish as I go. And this matte varnish is obviously, it's not matte, it's kind of a satin. It leaves a slightly strange texture contrast to the rest of the model, but I tend to varnish all my figures with a spray varnish at the end anyway, so that texture contrast will vanish at the end, and this just means I have to do a lot less repainting of stuff that's worn off. So just get a bit, just put it on my thumb here. Doesn't matter if this is quite thick because you're not covering up, you painted all the detail, it doesn't matter if you cover it up. I'm just going to brush it over like that. So it goes on kind of whitish and quite thick, but once it dries out, it produces a good protective coat, making sure I particularly get it on this side here, where I will wear it off there. Once this is dried, it will dry like this, as a faint satin sheen to it. But I find this is something I picked up recently, and it's really useful for me for not wearing off paint with my fingers. So there we go, the skull.